Well, welcome to another Defence Eye podcast. We've accelerated the schedule for obvious reasons with the news almost exactly 24 hours earlier. We were both at a City Forum Defence Conference where the Chief of the Defence Staff, Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton, had given the keynote address. And in the next session, the chairman said to all the assembled delegates, if you haven't heard, the Defence Secretary, John Healey, has resigned. And to say that there was a murmur around the room would be an understatement, and has led to a pretty hectic, nay, even chaotic 24 hours since then. So Tim and myself will try and work out what has happened, what is happening, and what might happen. And I think I can say at the moment, all of us in the best sense will be guessing more or less about what's going to happen, because things are such a mess. And speaking with fellow journalists, both television, radio, newspaper, over the last 24 hours, asking them for a single word description of what we're seeing at the moment have led to words which we certainly can't use in this broadcast.
Indeed. I mean, what we do know is this morning, Dan Jarvis, new Secretary of State for Defence, and Sir Richard Knighton were photographed in Downing Street talking to the Prime Minister, presumably about what they're going to do, what's going to happen. And they were all smiley and happy and looking, as if they were, not a crisis, but they were all there putting on a brave front to the world. Now, what could be going on? I mean, there's two possible scenarios. The obvious one is, did Dan Jarvis make a deal when he was appointed? Did he go into Downing Street yesterday? Did he tell the Prime Minister, I'm not taking this job unless you give me X billion more pounds?
Well, and something along those lines, which we spoke about a little bit earlier, Tim, was that John Healey's letter went to the Prime Minister, we're told, sometime around 11 o'clock yesterday morning. But the announcement of Dan Jarvis as his replacement was only announced on government website at about 9 o'clock. And I have heard from Labour-linked people already that, well, and yeah, it's febrile atmosphere at the moment. There's an awful lot of gossip, funnily enough. Was he slightly persuaded out of sense of duty to take the job? But did he also then say, my predecessor has published one of the most excoriating letters saying the Defence Investment Plan is just not up to snuff. Then the Veterans Minister, Al Collins, also says it is not fit for purpose. And a number of people have said, why on earth would you then want a job to try and sell DIP when your predecessors have just said, forget it. It's dead on arrival. And so, yes, Tim, I would be surprised. Dan Jarvis comes with a pretty good and high reputation, both as a politician, but also as an individual. And he's not stupid. Okay, as security minister, would he have all the ins and outs of DIP? Absolutely not. But he's well connected. He would have, pretty good idea. And he is being asked to sell the unsaleable. Bearing in mind what seems absolutely evident from John Healey's resignation letter is that the Treasury basically sometime around January, February said, here's the money, that's it. We're not going to negotiate any further. This is what we're offering. It's now up to you. I would be amazed if suddenly Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, now goes, oh, right, okay, yeah, I've looked around. I think I can find you another 10 billion. All the evidence is that the Treasury has basically been dog in a manger and has said, we're not interested in doing this. And similarly, this view is seemingly backed up by the fact a lot of mention of the back office role of Ed Miliband, the Energy and Climate Change Secretary, who's seen as basically the kingmaker in the Labour Party and in this government. But also characters like Yvette Cooper, the Foreign Secretary, all of whom in the past have been more or less, should we say, anti-defence, and so would gang up to say, well, and I've already seen online, I think you have as well, Tim, a lot of anonymous accounts saying Oh, yeah, so John Healey, he just wanted to close hospitals and shut schools and to pay for bombs. And we're going to see an awful lot more of this in the next week or two. But coming back to Dan Jarvis, he must know that this job, A, is probably time limited because the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is time limited. And B, it is the DIP, which is at the heart of everything now, is unsellable.
Well, this poses, obviously the question we posed was, did he try and make a deal? Did he say, I'm not doing this unless you give me something to sell? Now, that is, given where we are, the argument is, does the Prime Minister need him more than Jan Jarvis needs the Prime Minister? So, in that scenario, and it's pretty clear that this, after this meeting this morning, everyone's pretty tight-lipped, that something is going on, and something is underway. And you talked about the positions of the various ministers, but we're counting down to the by-election next Thursday, which could be the trigger event for the demise of the Prime Minister. So all this stuff could be massively overtaken by events, over the next weekend. Certainly by next weekend, the political landscape will have changed beyond recognition, possibly.
Yeah, but just to come back to your starting point there, Tim, about Dan Jarvis doing a deal. No, I absolutely don't disagree. It's the type of thing, if either of us were suddenly approached as an MP and told, could you take over this wrecked ship of the Ministry of Defence, we would go, well, yeah, hang on, what is it you expect me to do? But again, going back to the whole issue of the resignation letter of John Healey, it's painfully obvious that the Treasury has just basically answered pretty much no to everything. And I think the most killing sentence in that letter was when he said, you, the Prime Minister, have been unable to fund defence and the Treasury unwilling. And that unable, that was basically, you're the Prime Minister, but you have no authority, you have no power, you are unable to put the money where your mouth is. And that is killer. And so even if the PM promises Dan Jarvis, oh, no, I'll get you this, I'll get you this. Whether that survives contact with the Treasury is, to put it mildly, a very, very open question. And I would see, especially because of John Healey's resignation, no sign the Treasury is going to bend, and no sign that an awful lot of cabinet ministers would back the PM against the Treasury and the Chancellor. To the contrary, they know he's finished. They know his time expired. So they will be looking to consolidate their power bases, and those power bases do not rest with this PM any longer. And I think, Tim, and again, we've discussed this on a few occasions, it's actually now going to be a really busy week. You raised the Makerfield by-election, where the Labour PM hopeful Andy Burnham is standing, which, well, you live closer up in that area, so you can give us a little pen sketch on where you think things are going. But in the next, from I think this afternoon, we've got the visit of the Japanese Prime Minister to Britain. Early next week, you've got the G7 at Evian in France. And the day after that, on the 18th, so 6 days' time, I was about to say John Healey is due to be in Brussels. Obviously, not anymore. Dan Jarvis will be due in Brussels for the NATO defence ministers meeting. So any chance of burying defence and hoping it goes away, I've been told by good diplomatic sources, the Japanese especially have become highly undiplomatic on the subject of the global combat air program. And they have been making, over the past 18 months, very polite sort of, will you sign the contract, and they're sort of exhorting. And they've always been batted away with, we have other things on our plate, we have domestic politics, we must wait for the defence investment plan. And heard prior, this would be 2 to 3 weeks ago, from a number of diplomatic sources, the Japanese have basically said, if you have not signed the same contract that Italy and Japan have signed for GCAP, the Prime Minister will not visit. She will go elsewhere. And G7, okay, it's an economic forum, whatever. But because of Ukraine, because of defence and all this, there will be talk about defence. And I think, sadly, for the Prime Minister, if he thinks that he can just say, don't worry, I'm sorting it out, and everyone will go, oh, that's fine. No, he is, if he has not got a published DIP or has a DIP that is a bit, he's going to get an absolute kicking.
The money figures are bandied around about the settlement that was on the table when John Healey resigned. You're talking about 13.5 billion, including 3.5 billion of efficiency savings. That's sort of 10 billion of new money. It must raise serious questions about whether the UK can afford the GCAP on the timetable of the Italians and the Japanese. And you've got GCAP, you've got AUKUS, all piling in with massive demands of money. And I mean, we did a story a few weeks ago about the GCAP funding profile and what the partners are expected to contribute over the next decade. And we're talking about between 15 and 18 billion pounds development money for each of the partners. And
Still significantly cheaper than either F-35 or the F-47, which are, what's F-35 at? It's well over $100 billion and rising.
But they were talking, we saw figures bandied about a £6 billion contribution to GCAP by the UK over the next 4 years. That was on the £18 billion settlement that was floated about a month ago. So that's a third of that 18 billion that was floated around then. Now it becomes half of the 13.5, almost half of it's a massive thing, isn't it?
It is. But we then come to the mother lode of truth, which is not just FDR, but in the round. People still say, Britain, global power, we're a leader, all these things, which we both know is complete baloney. This may be the wake-up moment, though people will try and push back against it. The UK cannot be and isn't, by the way, and never will be, a global leader in sea, land, air, space, cyber. We've got to make choices. We cannot afford. And by the way, do you know what? When you look at the budgets, even of the United States, the US on a rolling basis has to say, okay, we're going to spend, we'll spend no money on the US Army, but this year we're not going to really boost the US Army. We're going to spend the money on the US Navy or the US Air Force. Even they have to make choices. Here is the choice now. The UK cannot and isn't and won't be a global leader in the three main domains, naval, land, and air. We are going to have to choose where our focus is. And I have to say, every time I run this exercise with people, and I've done this bits of the MOD and industry, and when you run, when you run this type of exercise, it comes out Navy first, RAF second, and Army is third. That doesn't mean it gets disbanded. It doesn't mean it has no weapons, but it is a lesser priority. So, and by the way, in the medium term, unless there is defence budget cut, which I actually at the moment don't think we can rule out, is it possible to fund GCAP and AUKUS at the same time? Yes, though between those two and nuclear, you've probably obligated well over 50% of what used to be the defence equipment plan. But it does mean the army has to work out something which is not based on two deployable divisions, which is completely unrealistic anyway.
Well, this is an interesting thing because it comes back to the nexus of the Makerfield by-election. And you're talking about GCAP and AUKUS. And these are two programs that are based in the northwest of England. And, Makerfield is less than 30 miles from Salisbury and Wharton, where the GCAP program is centred. And it's, the other side of Morecambe Bay from Barrow and Furness. And those Labour MPs who are centred up there, who have their constituencies there, who are trying to appeal to the working class voters of that region, the idea of killing or delaying or putting at risk GCAP or AUKUS is one thing that will, make them cautious about doing that, and will obviously make them give higher priority to those programs. And even, I mean, this is quite, and this is quite telling. You've got, you know, Angela Rayner, of course, the uh, heir apparent, a rival to Andy Burnham, maybe. Um, she has been quite vocal in supporting the UK defence industry in the northwest of England. In her constituency, of course, they make Boxer vehicles, which is an interesting thing in itself. But Burnham and all those other northwest MPs cannot be seen to torpedo GCAP or AUKUS. It would just be, it would, just sort of fuel those narratives of betrayal that the Reform and Restore Party are peddling about the Labour Party. And so, this is a nexus of decision-making that is rapidly approaching and coming to a denouement over the next week, even.
Well, and already people are wondering whether Andy Burnham either has the skills to understand the defence and the international foreign policy environment, or cares. And if what we are seeing in cabinet is a significantly powerful rump, the likes of Ed Miliband and Yvette Cooper and so forth, who really do believe in welfare, not warfare, and believe that given a choice between the welfare budget and defence, it's a no-brainer. It's welfare every time. We're seeing a prime minister at the moment who, coming back, John Healey's letter, he was unable to find the money, right? Powerless, basically being blown around by the winds inside cabinet. Do we believe Andy Burnham, who at the moment is just saying yes to everything and then having to backtrack quite a lot, do we believe he has got the knowledge, and then will he have the power to face down primarily the Treasury and whoever is his Chancellor? If he wins at Makefield and then wins the Labour leadership process, and will he be able to shackle the likes of Ed Miliband and saying, "Sorry, Ed, I'm cutting your budget by £6 billion"? At the moment, dealing with a number of people involved with Labour, they're saying he may well prove to be as bad, if not worse, than the current Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer.
Perhaps I will introduce a bit of a nuance in that debate about the traditional left-right divisions in the Labour Party and all that kind of thing. Because what is clear, you can call it the view from the north, is that Burnham's stick, his thing, is not quite left-right. His big stick is he is going to stand up for the north of England. Now, however he does that, is not quite as obvious as the, welfare or benefits or whatever. His big thing, going back to his sort of journey from being in the Labour cabinet, was of course the big Hillsborough thing and standing up to the London elite that refused to have the Hillsborough inquiry, and that was a thing that launched him on his political journey to be the mayor of Manchester and all that kind of stuff. The sort of, and that is their rival narrative to reform, the rival northern narrative to reform in what used to be called the Red Wall. So it's a Labour equivalent of the reform narrative that the metropolitan elite hate left behind communities, and it's all about London. It's all about all the money goes to London, all the money goes to transport for London. They're not funding.
And what's wrong with that, Tim? The Elizabeth line's brilliant. Long overdue. Should have been done 15 years earlier. And the sooner they start the northeast southwest equivalent to the Elizabeth line, I suspect they'll call it the Charles line, the better. Sorry, I'm not seeing a problem here.
But from the Burnham perspective, they have to build a counter narrative to the reform narrative. And it's not just about welfare. It's not just about the traditional left-right things. It's about, and you see it from Rayner, you see it from some of the other Northern MPs and Andy Burnham. It's about industry. It's about jobs. It's about moving factories to the north of England. And that plays into the defence thing with BA Systems, Air, Sea in the northwest of England. So when it comes to the crunch, they will protect those programs against giving the British Army a drone swarm made in Germany or made in America. So the politics of this will play out in a different way than what some people expect.
Except, again, don't disagree. And the fact that, you can say, look, it's jobs that will improve standard of living and all this stuff. The problem is they will run into I can't remember the exact figure, but of the new Labour MPs, let's just say it's 200, about 140 of them all come from the NGO sector, aid, charities, and so forth. Some of them, of course, no doubt, in the Red Wall and that. And that this is apparently why getting traction inside the Parliamentary Labour Party for defence has proved difficult, because you have got people who just go, well, if it means cancelling money for adolescent mental health, then no, absolutely not. And so, okay, is Andy Burnham probably a better networker than the current Prime Minister? Well, it's not a particularly high bar to jump. But he's suddenly going to find that if your theory is correct, yes, there is a compelling narrative for orders such as AUKUS, such as GCAP, but to ensure those go ahead in a meaningful way, he has to find money elsewhere. And this is the open question. I think it is interesting how there has, which you've raised, there has been more and more talk of, if it's British taxpayers' money for defence, it gets spent in Britain, in British factories. And indeed, both John Healey and his Industry Minister, Luke Pollard, have also gone a little bit further and said, these factories shouldn't just be where they put a name tag on saying made in Britain, but it's actually brought in from America, whatever. No. The intellectual property, the technology should be British. Treasury will fight this as well. So, but I think what we're describing here, Tim, is just a god awful mess. And there is no immediate, obvious way of saying, right, we're here and it's rubbish. We need to be going that way. No one seems to have worked this one out. What is interesting, and you were mentioning the video footage of Dan Jarvis and the Chief of Defence Staff going to Downing Street. Of note, people are saying there is a possibility that the CDS might also say, look, sir, up with this I cannot put, I will soldier no more. Now, I think that is less likely, but actually, if with what we've seen in the last 24 hours, do I think the Treasury is going, yep, we are on top, we are the masters. Actually, we're now going to double down on whatever you want to call it, humiliating the MOD by imposing more conditions and so forth. I'll put a fiver on that. That's the sort of nature of the beast. And I think we should put down on record, because it has been confirmed. You mentioned 3.5 billion in efficiency savings, right? The MOD and no government department ever meets efficiency savings targets. But one of the ones, which it's been confirmed, the Treasury has sort of said, oh, you can get efficiency savings, is they had cut money off the infrastructure budget for the MOD, which was meant to be bringing all the married quarters and the barracks up to a suitable standard. And as we both know, Tim, one of the reasons why people leave the services and leave early is the quality of the living quarters generally is absolutely rubbish. And so for the Treasury to very casually say, yeah, we don't know the exact figure, but to casually say, oh, yeah, well, we're going to cut 2 billion off improving the infrastructure, married quarters barracks, and give you that money for equipment is astounding. And I think it's especially astounding, bear in mind, in the first or second paragraph of John Healey's resignation letter, where he was doing the very polite political thing of, it was an honour to serve in your government and so forth. And he highlighted two things which he and the Prime Minister had done together. One was increased pay every single year for the services, but the other one was starting the process of upgrading accommodation across the MOD. So for the Treasury just to come back and say, nah, we're going to cut that, I think, that is the nature of the beast of the Treasury. And they've done this to Keir Starmer, they've done this to John Healey. Unless Andy Burnham comes in and basically says, I'm going to split the Treasury into two, a Department of Money and a Department of the Economy, to basically castrate it, he's going to run into exactly the same problems, and the Treasury will do everything it can to frustrate his plan. If he has plans for defence, the Treasury will continue trying to thwart those plans.
We have a countdown to the by-election, 6 days to go. We've got a weekend in which the Sunday papers, no doubt, will be full of scheming and backstabbing and backbiting from various cabinet ministers as they manoeuvre to secure their positions or do down their opponents. And then come Thursday into Friday morning, we'll see where the cookie crumbles and whether the self-proclaimed King of the North will actually launch southwards on his crusade to overthrow Keir Starmer. And who knows where that manoeuvre, that episode will end. But it's pretty clear that we are in a period of where no one really knows. And it's a matter of days, isn't it, where all this stuff will drop into place.
And to repeat, Tim, we've got a week where practically every day there is the chance and the prospect of showdowns between the Prime Minister and someone. And also big events, as I say, the G7 at Evian, then the defence ministers meeting at Brussels on the 18th. There is no certainty about any of those, but I think especially the defence ministers meeting in Brussels, as has been widely reported, in terms of progress on defence modernisation, the UK is ranked 31 out of 32 in NATO, the 32nd being Iceland, that doesn't have an armed forces. Dan Jarvis is not going to get a honeymoon period. He
No.
will be told very firmly, possibly even publicly, get a grip. And I deal with quite a few of the northern NATO nations who say, yeah, we hear this thing about, oh, well, the UK has special needs in, welfare and health. And these northern countries are saying, by the way, we've frozen, just as an example, we have frozen our education budget for the past 5 years. So in real terms, it has been cut. And we have frozen our health budget. So
Well,
again, it's not that good. And they're saying, sorry, we don't buy from the UK with a G7 economy that you can't take the same choices.
Well, I throw in another potentially destabilising event. It is tradition when a Secretary of State resigns that they make a statement to the House of Commons. And that could happen at any point over the next week. And given the eloquence of John Healey's letter, are we expecting an equally eloquent verbal assault on the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer and their funding plans for defence? And the point in which he chooses to deploy that could be a decisive intervention in this saga of instability that we're talking about.
And if we go back, and I know there are some more recent examples, but it was the speech of Geoffrey Howe, the previous Chancellor of the Exchequer. And was it Norman Tebbit said being attacked by Geoffrey Howe was being like being savaged by a dead sheep. But his resignation speech in the House of Commons started the relatively rapid defenestration of Margaret Thatcher. So yeah, Tim, I'm with you entirely on that, which is having written the resignation letter that he did, I can't believe that A, John Healey won't make a resignation speech in the House, and B, I can't believe it will be any nicer, if that's the right expression, than the letter he's written. So in which case, I have heard lots of people saying, right, we knew the clock was ticking on the Prime Minister, but he still could have been empowered by the end of the year. People are now saying the men in grey suits, which is a Tory party phrase, could well go in after the Makerfield by-election and just say, make it easy for everyone and go. But to wrap up, I think one of the problems is, from a defence point of view, everything is now completely up in the air. The only people who benefit from the uncertainty and the instability is the Treasury. It does not benefit any of the services. We both know, Tim, from our talks around the bazaars, people are saying they are delaying, deferring, spending on big programs on an almost daily basis. There is a degree of paralysis in the MOD industrial relationship. And when you have the events of the last 24 hours and project them forward, this instability, unless someone, you never know. Dan Jarvis may come in and say, I've agreed with the Prime Minister this, I'm now gripping this, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. Again, I'll buy you a Happy Meal if it doesn't happen, or if it happens, but I think it is unlikely because we have seen through the resignation, John Healey, to repeat that the Prime Minister is powerless and he is not master of his house.
It's going to be an exciting ride, whichever way it goes. And we will be back later on, probably later next week or either week after, to bring you an update in the next edition of the Defence Side podcast.